At 29, I tasted blood after my stepmother slapped me right beneath a poster declaring family comes first. As she raised her hand again, the doorbell rang. A stranger handed me a parcel from an unknown attorney. That package held the power to turn her perfect life into a criminal investigation. I was done being their financial prey. Now, I was the only one holding the matches. My name is Rowan Mercer, and on a crisp Wednesday morning in Maple Ridge, Colorado, I was trying to perform the impossible task of balancing a high-stakes career with the demands of a woman who hated me. The homeschool room was a temple to performative motherhood. It was situated at the back of our suburban two-story house, a space that smelled aggressively of lavender and chalk dust. The walls were painted a soft, non-threatening beige, adorned with laminated educational posters and a large calligraphy-style decal that read, "Family is an anchor during rough waters." Just below that, framed in gold, was a verse from Proverbs about obedience. It was ironic, considering the only person doing any obeying in this house was me, and the person demanding it had never earned a dime in the 5 years since she married my father. I sat at the corner of the large oak table, my laptop screen glowing with spreadsheets from Aurora Quantitative Capital. I was 29 years old, a senior data analyst handling portfolios worth millions. Yet here I was, playing tutor because Linda insisted that since I worked remotely, I had ample free time to contribute to the household. Beside me, my 14-year-old half-brother, Eli, stared blankly at a quadratic equation. He was a good kid, quiet and perpetually anxious, with the posture of someone who spent his life trying to take up as little space as possible. "You are missing the negative sign on the coefficient," I whispered, tapping his notebook with my pen. "If you do not flip it, the parabola goes the wrong way." Eli nodded quickly, erasing the graphite with frantic movements. "Thanks, Rowan." I tabbed back to my work email, quickly typing out a response to a client regarding a volatility index discrepancy. I had a conference call in 45 minutes. I just needed to get through this math block without an incident. The door to the homeschool room swung open. Linda Caro did not walk. She glided. At 50 years old, my stepmother maintained herself with the rigor of a military commander. Her blonde hair was a chemically perfect shade of honey gold, blown out to voluminous perfection. She wore a cashmere cardigan that cost $300 and stiff dark denim that looked uncomfortable for a Wednesday morning at home. She looked like every other upper-middle-class mother in Maple Ridge who spent her days organizing bake sales and judging her neighbor's lawn care. "Rowan," Linda said, her voice tight, "why is the internet lagging? I am trying to stream a documentary on Roman architecture for History Hour, and it keeps buffering. Are you downloading heavy files again?" I did not look up from my screen. "I am running a query on a remote server." "Linda, it takes up bandwidth. It is my job. The job that pays for the internet." She scoffed, walking over to inspect Eli's progress. She rested a manicured hand on his shoulder, and I saw him stiffen slightly, not out of pain, but out of the reflex to be perfect. "You are always throwing that in my face," she said, her tone dripping with martyrdom. "Money, money, money. That is all you care about. You have no concept of the spiritual value of what we are doing here. Creating a sanctuary for your brother." I typed a final command and hit enter. "I care about keeping the lights on. Linda. And since Dad is not making commission like he used to, someone has to be the realist." Linda walked around the table and stood directly behind my chair. I could smell her expensive floral perfume, a scent that used to make me nauseous, but now just triggered a low-level fight-or-flight response. "Speaking of contributions," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register, "my card was declined this morning. I was trying to order the new supplementary curriculum for next semester, the Platinum card, the one you manage." I stopped typing. I slowly turned my swivel chair to face her. I lowered the limit on the supplementary card. "Linda." Her eyes widened, blue and icy. "You did what?" "I lowered it to $500 a month," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the thumping of my heart. "I checked the statement yesterday. Last month, you spent $2,000 on educational supplies. Education is expensive. Rowan, you would not understand. You have no children. I pulled up a tab on my browser. I understand perfectly. I also understand that the Serenity Day Spa does not sell textbooks. Neither does that boutique furniture store on Main Street. $400 for a vintage globe? Really? Eli stopped erasing. The room went dead silent. The air pressure seemed to drop, sucking the oxygen out of the space. Linda's face flushed a deep, ugly red beneath her foundation. I needed that globe for the geography corner. She spat, to inspire him, and the spa was for my migraines. Migraines caused by the stress of managing this entire household while your father is out working himself to death and you sit here, clicking buttons, acting like a princess. You are stealing. Linda. I said. It was the first time I had used that word aloud. I had danced around it for years, calling it overspending or mismanagement. But today, with the bank alerts flashing on my phone, I was done. That is my money, not Dad's, mine, and I'm not authorizing any more limit increases. Linda looked at Eli, then back at me. Her expression shifted from defensiveness to pure, unadulterated rage. She felt exposed. She felt managed. And Linda Caro did not tolerate being managed. You ungrateful little parasite, she hissed. The word hung in the air, absurd and heavy. I paid the mortgage. I paid the utilities. I paid for the car she drove and the organic groceries she insisted on. But in her narrative, I was the leech. I was the 29-year-old failure living at home, the spinster daughter who needed her charity. She lunged. It happened so fast I barely had time to flinch. She grabbed the top of my laptop screen and slammed it down toward my fingers. I jerked my hands back just in time, but she was not done. You think you control this house? She screamed. I stood up, my chair clattering back against the bookshelf. Linda, stop. She stepped into my personal space, her chest heaving. You live under my roof. You eat my food. You undermine my authority in front of my son. She is a grown woman, Linda, Eli shouted, his voice cracking. He had stood up, clutching his pencil like a weapon he did not know how to use. Mom, stop it! Linda ignored him. She looked at me, her eyes wild, searching for a way to hurt me that words could not achieve. I saw her glance at my phone lying on the table, the screen recording indicator not on, but the threat was always there. You think you are better than us? She sneered. I am paying for us, I yelled back, my composure fracturing. That was the trigger, the reminder of her dependency. Linda's arm swung out. It was a wide, erratic motion, but it connected with shocking force. Her palm struck my left cheek with a wet, cracking sound that echoed off the whiteboard. My head snapped to the side. A sharp sting radiated from my jaw to my ear, followed immediately by a dull, throbbing heat. I tasted copper. My lip had split against my teeth. For a second, nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the computer fan and Linda's ragged breathing. I brought my hand up to my mouth, pulling it away to see a smear of bright red blood on my fingertips. I looked at her. I did not cry. I did not scream. Something inside me, a dam that had been holding back 5 years of guilt and obligation, quietly crumbled. Linda stared at the blood, and for a fleeting second, I saw fear in her eyes. But then she saw me standing there, silent, not fighting back, and the fear turned into arrogance. She raised her hand again. I am teaching you respect, she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. Since your father won't do it. Just as her arm tensed for the second blow, the sound cut through the violence like a knife. Ding-dong. The doorbell chimed, cheerful and mundane, a 2-note melody that belonged to a sitcom, not a domestic assault. Linda froze. Her hand hovered in the air, midway to my face. The interruption broke the trance. We were in the suburbs. We were the Mercer family. We did not have brawls. We had guests. She lowered her hand, smoothing her cashmere cardigan with a jerky, manic motion. She looked at Eli, then at me, her face rearranging itself into a mask of annoyance rather than rage. Get the door, she snapped at Eli. No, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, dead. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand and stepped around the table. Linda reached out to grab my arm, likely thinking I was going to run out screaming to the neighbors, or worse, that I had my phone recording. "Don't you dare make a scene. Rowan?" she hissed. I pulled my arm away from her grip and walked out of the homeschool room. I moved down the hallway, past the family photos where everyone smiled with white teeth, past the decorative cross on the wall. My cheek felt like it was on fire. I opened the front door. The world outside was blindingly bright. The Colorado sun was harsh and indifferent. Standing on the welcome mat was a courier in a brown uniform, holding a handheld scanner in a medium-sized cardboard box. He looked bored, chewing on a piece of gum. "Delivery for Rowan." "Elise Mercer?" he asked, not looking up from his device. "I am Rowan," I said. He looked up then, and his eyes widened slightly as he took in the swelling on my cheek and the small cut on my lip. He hesitated. Are you okay, ma'am?" "I am fine," I said, reaching for the stylus he offered. "Just a clumsy morning." He did not look convinced, but he was just a driver with a quota to meet. He handed me the device. "Sign here, please. Requires signature. High priority." I scribbled my name, my hand shaking slightly. "Who is it from?" "Return address says Hart and Lowell," he said, tearing off a receipt tag. "Attorneys at law, Oregon." I froze. I did not know anyone in Oregon. I certainly did not know any lawyers there. "Thank you," I whispered. He handed me the box. It was heavier than it looked, taped shut with tamper-evident security tape. I stepped back inside and closed the door, locking the deadbolt. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. Linda was standing at the end of the hallway. She had fixed her hair. She looked at the box in my hands, her eyes narrowing. "Who was that?" she demanded, walking toward me. "What did you buy now? I thought you said we were saving money." "It is not a purchase," I said, clutching the box to my chest. "It is a delivery, from a law firm." Linda stops a few feet away. "Law firm? What law firm? Why would a lawyer be sending things to this house?" She stepped closer, reaching out. "Let me see it." I took a step back. "No." Linda's face twisted. "Excuse me? In this house, we do not have secrets. If you are in legal trouble, Rowan, as the matriarch of this family, I need to know. Give me the box. Everything that comes into this house is family business." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had just slapped me because I refused to buy her a facial. I looked at the woman who had spent 5 years hollowing out my father and draining my bank account while calling me a parasite. And I felt the weight of the box in my arms. It felt solid. It felt real. It felt like the only thing in this house that actually belonged to me. "No," I said again, my voice louder this time. "This is addressed to me. Rowan Elise Mercer. Not you, not Dad, me." Linda lunged for it, her fingers brushing the cardboard, but I was faster. I turned and ran up the stairs, ignoring her shrieks of indignation. "You come back here! Rowan! Do not walk away from me when I'm speaking to you." I reached the landing and bolted for my bedroom door. I threw myself inside and slammed it shut, engaging the lock just as Linda's fist pounded on the wood. "Open this door!" she screamed from the other side. "You are acting like a child. Open it!" I backed away from the door, my chest heaving. My cheek throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I moved to my desk and set the box down. The label was stark white against the brown cardboard. Strictly private and confidential. To be opened by addressee only. I touched the tape. My fingers were trembling. I could hear Linda downstairs now, yelling at Eli, spinning the narrative, probably telling him that I had attacked her, that I was having a mental breakdown. But I tuned her out. I stared at the box. I did not know what was inside, but a cold, certain instinct settled in my gut. This wasn't just paper. This wasn't just legal jargon. This was the end of life as we knew it. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the adrenaline beginning to crash, leaving me shaking and cold. I did not open it immediately. I just sat there, listening to the muffled shouting of the woman who had made my life a prison, and I looked at the box that I suspected was the key. Then, I reached for my letter opener, before the slap, before the blood on my lip, and before the heavy cardboard box sitting on my desk, there was the slow, sedative hum of a trap closing around me. It did not snap shut all at once. If it had, I might have run. Instead, it closed inch by inch, disguised as love, disguised as family duty, until I was 29 years old and unable to move without permission. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the unopened package, but my mind drifted back 7 years. I was 22 then. I had just walked across a stage in Chicago to accept my master's degree in data science. I should have been celebrating, drinking cheap champagne with my cohort and planning a move to a high-rise downtown. Instead, I was numb. My mother had died 3 months prior, a sudden aneurysm that stole her from us in the span of an afternoon. I returned to Maple Ridge for the funeral, intending to stay for 2 weeks. I found my father, Greg, a hollowed-out shell of a man. He sat in the dark living room, unable to figure out how to work the washing machine, unable to cancel the subscriptions my mother had managed, unable to exist. Then came Linda. She appeared at the 10-month mark. It was obscene to me, the speed of it, but my father called it a miracle. He said he could not bear the silence of the house. Linda Caro did not just date my father. She auditioned for the role of savior. She brought casseroles. She organized the pile of condolence cards. She swept the floors and filled the fridge. She was the anti-grief. She was efficient, loud, and aggressively alive. She saw me, the grief-stricken daughter with a fresh degree and a job offer in the city, and she saw a resource. I remember the pitch perfectly. We were sitting on the back patio. Linda poured me a glass of iced tea and smiled. The kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Why pay rent in the city?" she had asked, her voice reasonable and sweet. "You are just starting out. Rowan, stay here, save your money, build a nest egg. Your father needs you right now. We can turn the guest suite into a home office. It will be smart." It sounded logical. It sounded like what a good daughter would do. So I declined the lease in Chicago. I moved my life into the guest room. I thought it was a temporary pit stop. I did not know I was signing a contract of indentured servitude. The first time it happened, I was 23. I had been working remotely for 6 months, saving aggressive amounts of my salary. I remember the evening clearly because the air conditioning had broken, and the house was stifling. My father sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Linda stood by the sink, looking tragic and helpless. "It is the transmission," Greg said, his voice muffled. "The mechanic says it is $4,000. I do not have it. Linda, the insurance payout from the funeral is gone." He looked so small, my father, who used to be the strongest man I knew, looked like a child. "I can help," I said. The words left my mouth before I processed them. I saw Linda's shoulders drop. She turned to me, eyes shining with performative gratitude. "Oh, Rowan," she said, "we could not ask that of you." But she was already reaching for her purse to find the invoice. I transferred the money, $4,800, to be exact, because there were hidden fees. My father promised me, with tears in his eyes, that it was a loan. He said he would pay me back in installments starting the next month. The next month came, and instead of a repayment, there was a crisis with the water heater. Then it was the property tax hike. Then it was the fact that Linda needed a newer vehicle because her old sedan was not safe for Eli. By the time I was 25, the dynamic had calcified. Linda was the architect of our domestic reality. She decided that Greg was the weary war hero who had worked hard all his life and deserved to rest. His declining commission checks were not a failure. They were a sign that the world was too harsh for him. Eli, my half-brother, was the fragile prince who needed homeschooling because the public system was too rough for his sensitive spirit. And I was the bank. I was the smart one, the capable one, the one who didn't have children or a husband to worry about. So surely, my money was just sitting there, rotting in a savings account, doing no good for anyone. The manipulation was never violent back then. It was soft. It was guilt wrapped in velvet. I remember when I tried to move out at 26, I had found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away. The rent was reasonable. I printed out the listing and brought it to dinner. "I think it is time," I said, placing the paper on the table. My father stopped chewing. Linda went still. She did not yell. She simply put her hand to her chest, her breath hitching in a terrifying, jagged rhythm. Her face went pale. "Linda?" Dad asked, panic rising in his voice. "My heart," she whispered. "It is fluttering again. The stress. The thought of you leaving. Rowan. Who will help your father with the bills? He cannot handle the math. You know his blood pressure spikes." She slumped in her chair. My father rushed to her side, fanning her with a napkin, looking at me with eyes full of accusation. "Not now, Rowan," he snapped at me. "Can't you see she is unwell? Why do you have to be so selfish?" I tore up the rental application that night. I paid for her visit to a private cardiologist the next week, who found nothing wrong but prescribed rest and low stress. The cost was $600 out of pocket. That was the pattern. Any attempt I made to claim my own life was met with a medical emergency or an emotional crisis. I was trapped by their incompetence. It wasn't until 3 months ago that I finally put a name to it. I had started seeing a therapist online. Secretly, I would drive my car to the Starbucks parking lot 3 miles away, connect to their Wi-Fi, and talk to Dr. Evans on my tablet. It sounds like financial abuse, Dr. Evans had said during our 4th session. I denied it immediately. "No," I said, "they are just bad with money. My dad is grieving. Linda is overwhelmed. I am just helping." "Rowan," she said gently, "you are paying 80% of the household expenses. You have no lease, no equity in the home, and you are being emotionally blackmailed whenever you try to leave. That is not helping. That is exploitation. You are being parentified. You are the functioning adult carrying 3 other people who refuse to walk." I didn't want to believe her, but the numbers didn't lie. Last night, the night before the slap, I had logged into my primary bank account. I had a sub-account labeled Escape Fund. For 2 years, I had been siphoning off bits of my bonuses, hiding them away, hoping to save enough for a down payment on a condo in Denver. I needed $50,000 to feel safe enough to leave. When I logged in, the balance was $12,000. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the dark homeschool room where I was working late. My stomach dropped. I clicked on the transaction history. Transfer to joint checking, $5,000. Transfer to joint checking, $8,000. Transfer to joint checking, $10,000. I had added my father as an authorized user on that account years ago, back when I trusted him. Back when I thought he might need emergency access if I was ever in an accident. I had forgotten to remove him. I felt like I was going to vomit. I texted him immediately. "Dad, why is the savings account drained?" His reply came 3 minutes later. "Don't worry, honey, just borrowed it for the business. Linda found a great opportunity for the homeschool accreditation. We will pay it back next quarter. Love you." Borrowed. $38,000. Gone. Then, a second text followed. "Actually, since you are up, Linda needs to order new ergonomic chairs for the classroom. Can you transfer another $2,000? The credit card is maxed out." I put the phone down on the cold table. I looked around the room. I looked at the whiteboard, the expensive projector I had paid for, the ergonomic rug, the bookshelves filled with mint-condition encyclopedias. This wasn't a home. It was a parasitic organism, and I was the host. I realized then that there was no next quarter. There was no repayment plan. My father was never going to pay me back because in his mind, and certainly in Linda's, my money was already theirs. I was not a person with a future, a potential husband, or dreams of my own. I was an asset. I was a line item on their budget. I sat there in the dark, 29 years old, with a 6-figure salary and a net worth that was effectively zero because I couldn't say no. That was the moment the sadness turned into something cold and hard. I realized that if I didn't cut the limb off, the infection would kill me. I resolved, right then, that the tap was running dry. The next morning, Linda asked for the credit card limit increase. I said no, and she slapped me. Now, sitting in my bedroom with the door locked, touching the raised welt on my cheek, I understood the physics of our relationship perfectly. Violence was just the final tool in the box when guilt and manipulation stopped working. I looked at the box from Hart and Lowell. I had spent 7 years paying for a family that saw me as nothing more than a walking checkbook. I had sacrificed my 20s to buy them comfort. I picked up the letter opener. The metal was cool in my hand. If they wanted to make everything about money, I thought, slicing through the packing tape with a sharp hiss, then perhaps it was time we looked at the ledger for real. I opened the flaps of the box. The cardboard flaps parted with a stiff resistance, revealing a thick cream-colored envelope resting on top of a stack of manila folders. The return address was embossed in raised black ink: Hart and Lowell, Attorneys at Law, Portland, Oregon. I had never been to Oregon. I did not know a soul in Portland. My hands were still trembling from the adrenaline of the confrontation downstairs, but a different kind of cold was settling into my chest now. It was the chill of the unknown. I sat cross-legged on my bed, the duvet bunching under my knees, and picked up the cover letter. The paper felt heavy, expensive. I unfolded it. Dear Miss Mercer, per our previous correspondence regarding the estate of Eleanor Vance, please find enclosed the requested audit of disbursements and the final query regarding the remaining liquidity of the trust. I stopped reading. My breath caught in my throat. Eleanor Vance was my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother. She had passed away 2 years ago. I remembered the day clearly because I had not been allowed to go to the funeral. Linda had told me that it was a small, private service, per my grandmother's wishes, and that my presence would only distress the distant relatives who blamed my father for my mother's death. She had told me, with a sympathetic tilt of her head, that it was better to let the dead rest and not reopen old wounds. I had believed her. I had sent flowers and mourned alone in this very room. I looked back at the letter. Per our previous correspondence, I had never corresponded with this firm. I forced myself to read on. The letter was dated 3 days ago. It stated that the firm was preparing to close the file on the Eleanor Vance Educational and Housing Trust, of which I, Rowan Elise Mercer, was the sole beneficiary. A trust. My grandmother had left me a trust. I quickly flipped to the second page, my eyes scanning for numbers. When I found the figure, the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Initial principal amount, $125,000. $125,000. I stared at the words, spelled out in black and white. It was life-changing money. It was a down payment on a house. It was freedom. It was the safety net I had been desperate for. The exit strategy I thought I would have to scrape together for another 5 years to afford. But then my eyes drifted to the next line. Current balance, $4,320.50. My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. Where was it? Where was the money? I grabbed the stack of manila folders, ripping them open. The first document was a timeline of correspondence. It showed that the trust had matured 18 months ago, triggered by a clause that released the funds for the purpose of continuing education or primary residence acquisition. There was a copy of an email, dated 18 months prior. It was from an email address I recognized. Greg Mercer, family@gmail.com. Subject: change of address and guardianship status. I read the email body. It was written in my father's voice, but the syntax, the sharp, authoritative phrasing, was pure Linda. It claimed that due to a medical crisis and mental health instability, I, Rowan Mercer, had moved back into the family home and had appointed Gregory Mercer as my temporary financial proxy to manage the disbursement of the funds for my specialized educational needs. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. I was working full-time then. I was sane. I was independent. Attached to the email was a scanned document, a change of address form. It redirected all mail for Rowan Mercer from my old apartment in the city to this house in Maple Ridge. That explained why I never saw the initial notification. They had intercepted the mail. They had stolen the notification before I even knew it existed. But how did they get the money? I opened the second folder. It was labeled Disbursements and Receipts. This was where the horror truly set in. It wasn't just theft. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. The statement showed a series of monthly withdrawals, ranging from $5,000 to $12,000, starting exactly 1 month after I had moved back home. The memo lines for the transfers were listed clearly. Educational support materials, home classroom infrastructure upgrade, specialized technological equipment for beneficiary. I pulled out a stapled packet of supporting evidence. The law firm required proof that the money was being used for the beneficiary, for me. There, stapled to a withdrawal request for $8,000, was a photograph. I held it up to the light. It was a picture of this room, the homeschool room. It showed the new ergonomic chairs, the smartboard, and the high-definition projector mounted on the ceiling. I looked at the receipt attached behind the photo. It was an invoice for the projector and the sound system. Total cost, $3,200. My hand shook uncontrollably. I bought that projector. I remembered the day clearly. It was 2 years ago. Linda had cried because the old TV was hurting Eli's eyes. She said he needed high resolution for his biology modules. I had just received my quarterly bonus. I transferred the money to her account, and she had ordered it. I dug through my memory. I had paid for the chairs. I had paid for the smartboard. I had paid for the refinished flooring. I flipped through more pages. It was all there. Every major purchase I had made for this house, the laptop I was currently using, the standing desk, even the repainting of the walls, was documented here. They had taken my money, my salary that I earned working 60-hour weeks, and used it to buy these things. Then, they had taken photos of those same items, sent them to the lawyers in Oregon, and claimed that the trust needed to reimburse them for buying these things for me. They had charged me twice, once from my paycheck and once from my inheritance. They were double-dipping. They were stripping me for parts and then selling the scrap metal. I felt a scream building in my throat, hot and jagged, but I swallowed it down. Screaming would alert Linda. Screaming would make me the hysterical daughter she wanted me to be. I needed to be the analyst. I needed to be the person who found the pattern in the data. I reached for the next document in the stack. It was a photocopy of a handwritten note. The paper looked old. The ink slightly faded. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was loopy, slanted, and rushed. It was my mother's handwriting. To my executor, the note read, "If you are reading this, I am gone. I am setting up this trust for Rowan because I fear for her future if Greg is left to manage things alone. He is a good man, but he is weak, and he is easily led. If Greg remarries, you must ensure this money goes to Rowan directly. Do not let any other wife access these funds. Protect my daughter." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. My mother knew, even years ago. She knew. She saw the weakness in my father that I had spent years trying to excuse. She had tried to build a wall around me from the grave, and my father, my own father, had helped Linda tear it down brick by brick. The final document in the box was a letter from the lead attorney, Mr. Jonathan Hart, Ms. Mercer. "Our firm has recently flagged several invoices submitted by your proxy regarding payments made to an entity listed as Caro Homeschool Initiative, LLC. Upon cross-referencing, we realize this entity shares an address with your residence. Furthermore, the volume of educational consulting fees paid to this LLC seems disproportionate to standard market rates for adult continuing education. We are pausing the final disbursement of the remaining $4,000 until we can verify your direct enrollment in this program. Caro Homeschool Initiative, LLC. I had never heard of it. I grabbed my laptop, opening an incognito browser window. My fingers flew across the keys. I searched the Colorado Secretary of State Business Registry. There it was. Caro Homeschool Initiative, LLC, registered 18 months ago. Registered agent. Linda Caro. Business address. Our house. I looked back at the lawyer's letter. They had been paying themselves. They created a fake company, billed the trust for consulting fees to teach me, a woman with a master's degree, and funneled the money straight into their own pockets. The spa treatments, the new SUV, the organic groceries. It wasn't just my salary funding their lifestyle. They had eaten my grandmother's legacy. They had devoured $125,000 in less than 2 years, all while calling me a parasite. I stood up. The room felt too small. The poster on the wall that said, "Family is an anchor," looked like a mockery. They weren't an anchor. They were concrete shoes, and they had been dragging me to the bottom of the ocean while smiling and asking me to pay for the boat. I walked to the door and listened. Downstairs, I could hear the television. Linda was probably watching her shows, relaxed, thinking she had handled me. She thought the slap had put me back in my place. She thought the box was just some junk mail I was being dramatic about. She had no idea that I was holding a nuclear launch code. I moved quickly. This wasn't about sadness anymore. Sadness was a luxury for people who were safe. I was in enemy territory. I grabbed my phone. I didn't just take pictures. I scanned every single page using a high-resolution document scanner app. I made sure every signature, every date, and every invoice number was legible. Click, scan, save. I created a new cloud storage account, one unconnected to my primary email, one with a password that was a random string of 30 characters. I uploaded everything: the will, the emails from my father, the fake invoices, the photos of the room, my mother's note. Upload complete. Then, I took the physical papers. I couldn't leave them here. Linda snooped. She had a key to my room, even though I had asked for privacy 1,000 times. If she found this, she would burn it. She would gaslight me until I believed I had hallucinated the whole thing. I went to my closet and pulled out my camping gear. Deep inside my hiking backpack was a waterproof dry bag, the kind used for kayaking. I slid the papers back into their envelope, then put the envelope into the dry bag. I rolled the top down, clipped it shut, and shoved it deep into the bottom of the backpack, covering it with old wool socks and a thermal blanket. I walked back to my desk and sat down. My cheek was still throbbing, a dull, rhythmic reminder of my status in this house. But as I looked at the empty cardboard box, I felt a strange, cold clarity washing over me. For 5 years, I had told myself a story. I told myself that they were just bad with money. I told myself that they loved me but were incompetent. I told myself that if I just worked harder, earned more, and explained things better, they would change. I was wrong. This wasn't incompetence. This was predation. They had systematically identity thefted me, embezzled my inheritance, and emotionally battered me into silence to keep the con going. I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor of my computer. The woman staring back at me wasn't the dutiful daughter anymore. She was a witness. She was a victim. And soon, she would be the plaintiff. I unlocked my phone and opened my calendar. I had a meeting with a client in 20 minutes. I would take the call. I would be professional. I would earn my salary. But tomorrow, I was going to burn this whole house down, metaphorically speaking. I picked up the empty box and shoved it under my bed. I needed to act normal. I needed them to think they still had the upper hand. I needed them to think I was still the broken girl who took a slap and stayed quiet. I wiped the last trace of blood from my lip. Let them think they won, I thought, because when I am done with them, they won't even own the name on their mailbox. The next morning, I told Linda I needed a change of scenery to focus on a quarterly forecast. I lied. I told her the internet at home was throttling my connection to the Aurora servers again. It was a flimsy excuse, considering I was the one paying for the high-speed fiber optic package. But Linda was too distracted by her own reflection in the hallway mirror to challenge me. She just waved a dismissive hand, her eyes fixed on a non-existent wrinkle, and told me to be back in time to help Eli with his biology lab. I drove straight to a co-working space on the edge of town, a place called The Loft that smelled of roasted coffee and aggressive productivity. I rented a private booth for the day. paying $40 for the privilege of silence. My first task was precise. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and dialed the internal extension for human resources at Aurora Quantitative Capital. "Hey, Sarah," I said when the rep answered. "I am doing a personal audit of my compensation history for tax purposes. I know this is going back a bit, but did I ever qualify for the remote workspace stipend back in 2021? There was a pause, the sound of typing on the other end. "Rowan," Sarah said, her voice bright and helpful. "You did not just qualify. You claimed it. We disbursed the full amount in March of that year. $10,000 for equipment and home office retrofitting." My hand tightened around my pen. $10,000. "Can you confirm which account that was deposited to?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Sure. It went to the Chase checking account ending in 4492, the joint one on file for emergency expenses." The room seemed to tilt. 4492. That was the account my father had helped me open the week I moved back to Maple Ridge. He had said it was just for household flow, a way to easily transfer money for groceries or utilities without constant Venmo requests. I had never checked the inbound transfers on that account, only the outbound ones I sent. "Thanks, Sarah," I said. "That clears it up." I hung up. I stared at the gray fabric wall of the booth. They had stolen $10,000 from my employer. They had taken a stipend meant for my desk, my chair, and my monitors, and they had pocketed it. And then, with breathtaking audacity, they had asked me to buy those exact same items with my own salary. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply opened a new browser tab and confirmed my appointment with Mason Cole. Mason was a fee-only financial planner I had found online the night before. His office was 2 towns over, in a glass-fronted building that looked nothing like the cozy, deceptive warmth of Maple Ridge. I drove there with the radio off, my mind replaying every financial conversation I had ever had with my father. Mason was young, perhaps 35, with a sharp haircut and eyes that looked like they read balance sheets for fun. He shook my hand firmly and did not ask about the fading bruise on my cheek. "I need a forensic audit of my existence," I told him as I sat down. I gave him my social security number, my driver's license, and authorization to pull everything: the credit bureaus, the IRS transcripts, the banking check systems reports. We sat in silence for 10 minutes, while his printer hummed in the corner. When he finally walked over to the machine and retrieved the stack of warm paper, his expression had shifted from professional neutrality to something sharper: concern. "Rowan," Mason said, sitting back down, "we need to go through this line by line." He slid a thick packet across the mahogany desk. "First, let us talk about your business," he said. I frowned. "I don't have a business. I am a W-2 employee." Mason tapped a line on the report with a gold pen. "According to the state of Colorado and the IRS, you are the 50% owner of Caro Mercer Learning Hub, LLC. I stared at the name. It was different from the one the lawyers had mentioned in the letter. That one was Caro Homeschool Initiative. This was Caro Mercer. My name was on the door. "It was incorporated 3 years ago." Mason continued. "The registered agent is Linda Caro. The business address is your father's house." I felt the blood drain from my face. I never signed for this. Mason flipped the page. "It gets worse. During the pandemic, this entity applied for 2 rounds of small business relief loans. They claimed to be a specialized educational facility serving at-risk youth." He circled a number in red ink. $90,000. "Rowan, they received $90,000 in federal aid." 90,000. The number was so large it felt abstract. "Where did it go?" I whispered. Mason pulled out the credit report. "Here is the corporate credit card linked to the LLC. You are listed as a guarantor." I looked at the transaction history. It was a grotesque diary of Linda's life over the past 3 years. Creek View. Luxury Resort and Spa. $4,000. Land Rover dealership. Down payment. $8,000. Pottery Barn. $2,500. Delta Airlines. $3,000. There were charges for educational retreats that aligned perfectly with the dates Linda and her church friends went to Napa Valley. There were charges for vehicle maintenance that matched the brand new SUV sitting in our driveway, the one she told me Greg had bought with a bonus from the garage. My father's garage had not turned a profit in 6 years. "This is my debt?" I asked, my voice trembling. "If the LLC defaults, yes," Mason said, "but that is not the primary issue right now. Rowan, look at me." I looked up. His eyes were hard, serious. "This isn't just mooching relatives. This isn't just a family dispute. This is federal wire fraud. This is identity theft. This is bank fraud. Someone used your social security number to secure government loans and credit lines without your consent." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Think back. Did you ever sign anything? Anything at all? Maybe a tax document they said was for the house, or a cosign form for a student loan for your brother?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. 3 years ago, a Tuesday evening, Linda had been cooking lasagna, humming a hymn. She had wiped her hands on her apron and slid a stack of papers across the granite island. "Honey, Daddy needs to refinance the house to get a better rate," she had said. "Since you live here now, the bank needs a residency affidavit, just confirming you occupy the guest room. It is standard for multi-generational households." She had flipped to the back page. "Sign here and here." I had been tired. I had been working on a merger deadline. I trusted them. I signed. I signed the residency affidavit. I whispered, "At least, that is what she told me it was." Mason nodded grimly. It was likely the articles of organization for the LLC, or the loan application itself. They buried the lead and showed you the signature line. He gathered the papers and looked at me with an intensity that cut through the fog of my shock. "You need to understand the gravity of this. If the IRS or the Small Business Administration audits this company, and they eventually will, you are on the hook, not just for the money, but for the fraud. You are a listed owner." I felt a wave of nausea. I could go to jail. I could lose my job at Aurora. My license to practice data security would be revoked. They hadn't just stolen my past. They had rigged my future with explosives. "What do I do?" I asked. Mason took a breath. "First, we freeze everything. Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. We lock your credit down so tight, air cannot get through. Second, you do not go home and scream at them. You do not tip your hand." He slid a business card across the desk. It wasn't his. "This is Nora Harrington. She is a litigator who specializes in financial fraud and elder abuse recovery. I have already texted her your name. She is expecting your call." "Elder abuse?" I asked. "I am 29. Mason pointed to the file. "It is a catch-all term, but it fits. But Rowan, you need to be prepared. If you pursue this, if you try to clear your name, you will be initiating a criminal investigation against your father and his wife. There is no middle ground here. You cannot fix this with a repayment plan." I stared at the stack of papers, the $90,000 in loans, the $10,000 stipend, the $125,000 trust fund, $225,000. That was the price tag they had put on my love. That was the cost of my loyalty. I thought about the box under my bed. I thought about my mother's handwriting. "Do not let any other wife access these funds." She had known. She had tried to save me, and I had let them walk all over her memory. I looked at Mason. "Do it," I said. "Freeze it all." Mason nodded and began typing furiously. I walked out of his office 20 minutes later with a USB drive containing the full forensic report. The sun was setting over the city, casting long, sharp shadows across the parking lot. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg. "Hey, kiddo. Linda is asking if you can pick up pizza on your way home. She is too tired to cook. Also, we need to talk about the electric bill. It is high this month." I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. They had stolen nearly $250,000 in my name, and they still wanted me to buy the pepperoni pizza. I typed back, "Sure, be there soon." I put the phone down. I was going to buy the pizza. I was going to walk into that house. I was going to smile. And then I was going to call Nora Harrington and burn their world to the ground. I sat in the dark of my bedroom, the pizza I had bought them turning cold on the kitchen counter downstairs. I had played my part. I had walked in, handed Linda the box, forced a smile when she complained about the amount of pepperoni, and then retreated to my room claiming a migraine. It was only half a lie. My head was pounding, but not from pain. It was pounding with the rhythm of a new, horrifying realization. Mason, the financial advisor, had found the shell company, but I needed to know what that company actually did. I opened my laptop and typed Caro Mercer Learning Hub into the search bar. I expected a dead link. I expected a placeholder page. What I found was a fully functioning, terrifyingly detailed website. It was amateurish, built on one of those free drag-and-drop platforms, with a color scheme of aggressive purple and gold. The banner at the top read, Caro Mercer Learning Hub, Elite Homeschooling for the Gifted Mind. I scrolled down, and my breath hitched in my throat. There was a section titled Our Founders. On the left was a heavily filtered photo of Linda, looking pious and intellectual in a blazer I had bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. Her bio described her as a visionary educator and child development specialist. Linda had dropped out of community college in the 90s. But it was the photo on the right that made my stomach turn over. It was me. It was a candid shot taken last Thanksgiving. I was sitting at the dining table, laughing, pointing at a diagram in Eli's textbook. It looked warm. It looked professional. Underneath my face, the text read, Rowan Mercer, co-founder and director of curriculum data, Ivy League graduate, senior analyst at Aurora Capital. Miss Mercer oversees our STEM track and ensures every student achieves Ivy League standards. I did not go to an Ivy League school. I went to a very good state university and then a rigorous private college in Chicago for my master's. But Linda did not care about facts. She cared about prestige. She was selling my degree, my job title, and my face to strangers on the internet. I clicked on the testimonials page. The Caro Mercer method changed our son's life. The customized data approach is revolutionary. Anonymous parent. We are so grateful for the scholarship opportunities provided by the Mercer Trust. The H, family. I froze. The Mercer Trust. She wasn't just stealing the money. She was marketing the theft as a philanthropic endeavor. She was claiming that my grandmother's money, the money intended for my survival, was a charitable fund she controlled to help the community. I needed to hear it. I needed to know if this was real or just a digital fantasy she had built to stroke her ego. I grabbed my burner phone, an old device I kept for two-factor authentication testing at work, and dialed the number listed at the bottom of the page. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The phone rang twice. Thank you for calling Caro Mercer Learning Hub, a voice chirped, where we build the leaders of tomorrow. It was a recording. It was Linda's voice, but pitched higher, smoother, trying to sound like a receptionist at a high-end private school. For enrollment inquiries, press 1. To speak with Director Caro, press 2. I pressed 2. The line clicked. Hello? This is Director Caro speaking. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a recording this time. It was Linda. She was downstairs, probably sitting in her recliner with a glass of wine, answering the phone like she was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I held the phone to my ear, unable to speak. Hello? Linda said again, her voice dripping with professional sweetness. Is anyone there? We are currently accepting applications for the fall semester. Our spots are very limited due to our high instructor-to-student ratio. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell that she was a fraud, that her instructor was a data analyst who had no idea she was employed there, but I bit my lips so hard I tasted iron. I ended the call. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just a tax shelter. She was actually running a business. She was soliciting students. Just as I was trying to process the sheer scale of the deception, a notification pinged on my laptop. It was a direct message on Instagram. I rarely checked my message requests, but the preview caught my eye. It was from a woman named Sarah Miller, I didn't know a Sarah Miller. I opened it. Hi, Rowan. I hope you do not mind me reaching out. I am Tyler Miller's mom. He is in the Tuesday co-op group with Eli. I just wanted to personally thank you. I stared at the screen. Tyler Miller? Tuesday co-op? I typed back, my fingers trembling. Hi, Sarah. I am not sure I follow. Thank me for what? The reply came almost instantly. The bubbles danced on the screen. Oh, do not be modest. Linda told us everything. She told us how you set up the scholarship fund using your inheritance so that kids like Tyler could attend the hub. We were struggling so much after my husband lost his job, and that $500 monthly grant made it possible for us to pay the remaining tuition. Your mom is so proud of you. I read the message 3 times. The remaining tuition. I closed my eyes, the pieces of the puzzle slamming together with violent force. Linda was charging other parents. She was running an unlicensed school out of our living room while I was working upstairs. She was telling these parents that the fee was, say, $1,000 a month, but because of the Mercer Scholarship, funded by me, they only had to pay $500. She was playing the benevolent saint, using my stolen money to subsidize her customers, and then pocketing the cash they paid her, and she was using my name to legitimize the whole operation. I felt sick. I felt violated in a way that went deeper than just money. She had taken my identity, my hard work, my professional reputation, and twisted it into a prop for her con. Then my email chimed. It was a priority notification. Sender, Hart and Lowell Attorneys. I opened it, expecting another demand for receipts. Instead, the subject line read, Urgent. Update regarding state inquiry. Dear Miss Mercer, in light of the discrepancies found in your file, we feel it is necessary to inform you of the catalyst for our renewed audit. 10 days ago, the Colorado Department of Education and the State Board of Finance received an anonymous whistleblower complaint regarding the Caro Mercer Learning Hub. The complaint alleged that the entity was soliciting donations and tuition under false pretenses and misappropriating educational trust funds. This complaint named you as a potentially complicit party. However, given your lack of access to the funds as shown in our preliminary trace, we are now operating under the assumption that your identity may have been used without your knowledge. We strongly advise you to secure independent counsel immediately. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning. A whistleblower. Someone else knew. The box yesterday hadn't arrived out of the blue. The lawyers hadn't just decided to audit a random file. Someone had tipped off the state. Someone had looked at Linda's little empire and seen the rot underneath. Who? I ran through the possibilities. A parent who realized the curriculum was fake? A bank teller who noticed the signatures didn't match? Or someone closer? My mind flashed to my father. Greg Mercer, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, the man who taught me how to ride a bike. I thought about the last few months. I thought about the way he spent his evenings. He wasn't working in the garage. He was hiding there. I would come down to get water at night and see the light under the garage door. I would hear the clink of glass bottles. When he came inside, he smelled of sawdust and cheap whiskey. He never looked me in the eye anymore. When Linda would go on one of her rants about how much I owed them, Greg would just stare at the floor, his jaw working, saying nothing. Did he know? Of course he knew. He signed the papers. But did he report it? No, he was too weak. If he had reported it, he would have warned me. He would have told me to run. Instead, he had asked me to buy the pizza. But someone had reported it, and that report had triggered the avalanche that was currently burying my family. I stood up and paced the small room. The walls felt like they were closing in. I was trapped in a house with 2 criminals. One was a sociopath who believed her own lies, and the other was a coward who was drinking himself to death to avoid facing them. And I was the complicit party. If I didn't act fast, the state of Colorado wouldn't see a victim. They would see a co-founder. They would see my face on the website, my name on the bank accounts, and my signature, forged or tricked, on the LLC papers. I couldn't just have a conversation. I couldn't just walk downstairs and scream at them. Linda would deny it. She would say I set up the website. She would say I authorized the tuition scheme. She would gaslight me until I doubted my own sanity. And then she would call the police and say I was having a psychotic break. I needed armor. I needed a weapon that didn't rely on emotion. I looked at the contact information Mason had given me for Nora Harrington. I sat back down at my desk. I opened a new document on my secure cloud drive. I began to type a timeline. Date: November 14th, 2022. Event: unauthorized transfer of $8,000. Date: January 3rd, 2023. Event: creation of fraudulent website claiming false credentials. I typed for 2 hours. I chronicled every lie, every stolen dollar, every fake receipt. When I finished, I saved the file as the evidence. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Maple Ridge looked so peaceful under the streetlights. It was the perfect place to hide a crime. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. Greg was going out to the garage again. I heard the heavy thud of the door closing, followed by the hiss of a beer can opening. He knew the ship was sinking. He was just trying to stay drunk enough not to feel the water rising. But I was done swimming. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Mason. I have the files. I have the proof of the business. I am ready to meet Nora. Set it up. I turned off the light in my room, plunging myself into darkness. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the daughter. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the victim. Tomorrow, I would be the prosecution. Nora Harrington's office was not the sterile, glass-walled environment I had expected. It was located in a converted brownstone on the edge of the city, a place that smelled of old mahogany and aggressive litigation. Nora herself was a woman made of sharp angles and sharper intellect. She sat behind a desk that looked large enough to land a plane on, reviewing the dossier I had compiled with Mason. She flipped through the pages of the credit report, the trust fund audit, and the screenshots of the Caro Mercer Learning Hub website. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She simply read, her eyes scanning the data with the precision of a surgeon looking for a tumor. Finally, she closed the file and looked at me. "We have identity theft," she said, her voice flat and professional. "We have embezzlement of a trust instrument. We have federal loan fraud. And we have wire fraud." She leaned back in her chair. "If I take this to a prosecutor today, your father and stepmother will be arrested before dinner. Is that what you want?" I sat frozen. The question hung in the air. Arrested. Handcuffs. The neighbors watching. Eli watching. "I don't want to destroy Eli's life," I said quietly. "He is 14. If they go to prison, he goes into the system." Nora nodded, as if she had expected this answer. "Then we need leverage," she said. "We need to make the case so airtight, so undeniable, that they will agree to any terms we set to avoid jail. Right now, we have paper trails. Paper trails can be argued. They can claim you gave verbal consent. They can claim it was a misunderstanding. We need their voices. We need confessions." She opened a drawer and pulled out a digital voice recorder, placing it on the desk. "Colorado is a one-party consent state. Rowan, that means as long as you are a participant in the conversation, you can record it without the other person knowing. It is perfectly legal, and it is admissible in court." She slid the device toward me. "You are going to act like the dutiful daughter for 3 more days. You are going to ask questions, innocent questions. You are going to get them to explain their logic, and you are going to record every single word." I took the recorder. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the box from the lawyers. "This is the strategy," Nora continued, her eyes locking onto mine. "Do not confront them. Do not let your anger show. If you scream, they clam up. You need to be confused. You need to be helpful. You need to be the victim they think you are." I walked out of her office with a script in my head and a wire in my pocket. My first target was Greg. I waited until the next afternoon. I called him from the parking lot of the co-working space, making sure the background noise sounded professional. I hit record on the app Nora had installed on my phone, which linked directly to her secure server. "Hey, Dad," I said when he answered. He sounded winded, like he had been moving boxes. Hey, kiddo, he said. What is up? I just got a weird notification from my bank. I lied, keeping my voice steady. It mentioned something about a small business loan inquiry. I think it might be spam, but I wanted to check if you guys knew anything about it before I flagged it as fraud. There was a silence on the other end, a long, heavy pause. Don't flag it, Greg said quickly. His voice dropped an octave. Do not call the bank. Rowan. Why not? I asked, injecting a note of innocent confusion into my tone. If someone is using my name— It is not someone, he said. Look, it is just a bridge loan, for the house, for the family. But Dad, I said, pressing gently, it is in my name. I didn't sign anything. Greg sighed, the sound of a man who was tired of carrying his own secrets. Linda said it was the only way. Honey, my credit is shot. You know that. And with the garage not bringing in much, we needed the cash flow. It is just on paper. We are paying it back. You were so busy with work. I didn't want to bother you with the paperwork. I signed it for you. It is a family proxy. It is standard. I closed my eyes. There it was. Admission of forgery. Admission of taking the loan. So you signed my name on the loan documents? I asked, clarifying for the tape. I had to. Rowan? He snapped, his guilt turning into defensiveness. Do you want us to lose the house? Do you want Eli to starve? We did what we had to do. It is just a few small loans. We will pay it off before you even notice. I hung up. I saved the file. Greg Confession Loan Forgery, MP3. He called it a few small loans. He had no idea I knew it was $90,000. Target 2 was Linda. This one required more finesse. Linda was smarter than Greg. She was a narcissist, and the way to trap a narcissist was to feed their ego. I went home that evening. The house was quiet. I found Linda in the kitchen, organizing her spice rack. She looked up when I entered, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of rebellion. I gave her none. Hey, I said, leaning against the counter. I was looking at the homeschool room today. The new projector is really amazing. Linda smiled, preening. It is top of the line, she said. Only the best for Eli. I nodded. It must have cost a fortune. I was looking at my trust fund statements. I was a little confused about how the disbursements worked. Did the lawyers give you a hard time about the approval? Linda laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. Lawyers are idiots. Rowan, they sit in their offices and try to gatekeep money that belongs to families. I just had to get creative. Creative? I asked, sliding my hand into my pocket to ensure the phone was recording. You have to speak their language, she said, turning back to her spices. If you tell them you want money for a renovation, they say no. If you tell them it is for educational infrastructure and create a valid entity like the hub, they cut the check. I game the system. Rowan, and look at what we have to show for it. We have a business. We have assets. But isn't that risky? I asked, using the money for the business instead of my tuition. It is an investment, she corrected me, her tone sharp. That money was sitting there doing nothing. Now it is building a legacy. When the hub takes off, you will get every penny back plus interest. You should be thanking me. I am the only one in this family with financial vision. I forced a smile. You are right, Linda. You always know best. I walked away. Linda Confession Trust Fraud, MP3. She had admitted to gaming the system. She had admitted to creating the entity specifically to trick the lawyers. But Nora had asked for one more thing: physical evidence, chains of custody. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen with my laptop open. Linda, I said, looking frazzled, I have a problem. HR at Aurora is doing a random audit of remote work stipends. They need to see the original receipts for the equipment I bought in 2021. The standing desk, the monitors, the ergonomic chair. Linda looked up from her coffee. Why do they need that now? They are cracking down on tax compliance. I said, if I cannot produce the receipts, they might deduct the $10,000 from my next paycheck. Linda's eyes widened. $10,000 was a lot of money. Money she needed me to keep earning so I could pay her mortgage. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, standing up. Bureaucrats? Hang on. She walked into her office, a small alcove off the living room where she kept her files. I followed her. She pulled down a binder labeled House Expenses 2021. She flipped through it and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Here, she said, handing them to me. The receipt for the desk, the chair, the computer. I kept everything. I am organized, unlike your father. I took the papers. I looked at them. They were the original receipts, but there was something else attached to the back of the invoice for the computer. It was the bank transfer confirmation. Transfer from account ending in 4492, Greg and Rowan Joint, to Caro Mercer Learning Hub. She hadn't just bought the computer. She had transferred the money from my stipend account to her LLC, and then bought the computer through the business to claim the tax write-off. She had stolen the money, laundered it through her shell company, and then used it to buy the equipment I was using, likely claiming it as a business expense for her company. Thanks, Linda, I said. You are a lifesaver. I am, aren't I? She said, patting my arm. Make sure you scan them and give me the originals back. We need them for our tax season. I walked upstairs and scanned them immediately. Then I sent the high-resolution files to Nora. The final nail in the coffin came on Sunday. Linda had insisted I attend the monthly fellowship meeting at the community church. She wanted to show off the Happy Family unit. I agreed. We stood in the church hall, surrounded by neighbors holding paper plates of potato salad. Linda was in her element, holding court with a group of other homeschool moms. I stood at the edge of the circle, my phone in my hand, recording. Your center looks amazing on Facebook. Linda, one woman said, how did you afford all that equipment? The smartboards alone must be thousands. Linda smiled, a beatific, humble expression washing over her face. Well, we were very blessed, she said, her voice carrying just enough for the group to hear. Rowan's late grandmother, on her mother's side. She left a substantial endowment specifically for educational development. The Vance family has always been very supportive of my vision. They insisted we use the legacy to build something for the community. I felt a cold rage burning in my chest. She was invoking my dead grandmother's name. She was using the woman she had banned me from mourning to validate her theft. That is so generous, another woman said. It is, Linda agreed. We are just stewards of the blessing. I stopped recording. Linda, public false claim, MP3. I had enough. I had the loans. I had the trust. I had the receipts. And I had the public lie. I met Nora on Monday morning. I handed her the updated timeline and the flash drive with the audio files. Nora listened to the recordings in silence. When Linda's voice filled the room, bragging about gaming the system, Nora allowed herself a small, grim smile. This is it, she said. This is the kill shot. She opened her laptop. I am sending the preliminary packet to Hart and Lowell this afternoon. They will formally freeze the remaining assets in the trust and issue a statement clarifying that you are the sole victim of unauthorized proxy actions. That clears you of the embezzlement liability on that front. She typed a few lines. I am also contacting the State Financial Inspector's office. I have a contact there. I am filing a protective disclosure. We are reporting the fraud, but we are framing you as the whistleblower and cooperating witness. That shields you when the LLC implodes. She looked up at me. Now for the final step. We do not just serve them papers. If we just sue them, they will drag this out in court for years. They will spend the money they stole on defense attorneys. We need to end this fast. How? I asked. We hold a family meeting, Nora said. She pulled out a calendar. You tell them you want to clear the air. You tell them you want to discuss the future of the household finances. You make it sound like you are finally capitulating, like you are ready to sign whatever they want to keep the peace. And then? And then, Nora said, her eyes cold as steel. I walk in, and I put a choice on the table. They can sign a full confession and a repayment agreement, or they can leave the house in handcuffs. I looked at the calendar. Sunday night. Let's do it, I said. I drove home that evening with a strange sense of calm. I watched Linda berating Eli for not finishing his chores. I watched Greg hiding in the garage. I watched the farce of my life playing out one last time. They thought I was the bank. They thought I was the doormat. They had no idea that I had just signed the warrant for their destruction. The text came at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, while I was sitting on the back porch drinking coffee and watching a spider weave a web between the railing posts. It was a fitting metaphor for the day ahead. Family meeting tonight at 7. Linda had texted, in the classroom, "We need to reset the energy in this house. No electronics, just us." I stared at the screen. She called it a reset. I called it an arraignment. I texted back, "Okay, is it all right if my friend Nora stops by? She is in town for the weekend, and I promised we would grab dinner after. She can sit in the back and read. She will not disturb us." Linda's reply was almost instantaneous. "Fine, but this is a private family discussion. Rowan, she stays out of it." I smiled. "Understood," I typed. Nora arrived at 6:45. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She wore dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a soft gray blazer. She looked like exactly what I had described, a friend stopping by for a casual visit, but the leather tote bag on her shoulder was heavy, and her eyes were scanning the perimeter of the property like she was assessing a crime scene, which, in a way, she was. "Ready?" she asked quietly as we walked up the driveway. I touched the pocket of my cardigan, feeling the hard plastic of the flash drive. "I am ready." We entered the house. The air smelled of pot roast and tension. Linda was already in the homeschool room, arranging chairs around the long oak table. She had set out a pitcher of water and 4 glasses, as if we were a board of directors about to discuss quarterly synergy rather than grand larceny. Greg was there too, sitting at the head of the table, looking like a man facing a firing squad. He held a tumbler of amber liquid that I knew wasn't apple juice. And Eli, my stomach twisted when I saw him. He was sitting in the corner, hunched over his knees, looking terrified. I walked in, Nora trailing a step behind me. "Hi, everyone," I said. "This is Nora." Linda gave a tight, dismissive nod. "Hello. Nora, please take a seat by the bookshelf. This won't take long. We just need to help Rowan understand some family dynamics." Nora smiled, a polite, dangerous smile, and sat down in the shadows, placing her heavy bag on the floor. I took my seat across from Linda. I stood up for a moment and walked to the whiteboard. The ghost of yesterday's algebra lesson was still visible in faint marker streaks. I picked up a black marker and wrote, in large, block letters, "Mercer Family Finances. Transparency needed." Linda bristled. "We do not need a presentation. Rowan, sit down." I sat. Linda took a deep breath, clasping her hands on the table. She looked at Greg, then at Eli, and finally fixed her gaze on me with a look of practiced disappointment. "Rowan," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We are here because the atmosphere in this house has become toxic. Your father and I have done everything for you. We opened our home when you were grieving. We gave you a workspace. We built a family around you." She paused for effect. "But lately, you have become cold, secretive, and this obsession with money. It is hurting us. It is hurting your brother. We are a family. Rowan, we do not count pennies. We share burdens. When your father needed help, we assumed you would step up because that is what families do. But instead, you are hoarding resources and making us feel like beggars in our own home." I said nothing. I just watched her. I watched the way she tilted her head to catch the light, the way she dabbed at a dry eye. Greg cleared his throat, taking a large gulp of his drink. "Listen, honey," he said, his voice rough. "We know the parcel from the lawyers upset you, but you have to understand. That trust fund. Your grandmother wanted it to help the family, and right now, the family is the business, the hub. If the hub succeeds, we all succeed." "So you admit you used the trust fund for the hub?" I asked softly. Linda cut in. "We invested it. There is a difference. And frankly, I am appalled that you would question my judgment. I have managed this household for 5 years. I know what keeps the roof over our heads." She looked at me, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to crumble under the weight of their combined disappointment. I looked at Eli. He was picking at his cuticles until they bled. "Is that all?" I asked. Linda sighed, exasperated. "No, that is not all. I want access to the main account restored, and I want you to call that law firm in Oregon and tell them to release the hold on the remaining funds. It is embarrassing. Rowan, they are treating your father like a criminal because of your confusion." My confusion. I looked over at the bookshelf. "Nora," I said, "do you have a pen?" Nora stood up. She picked up her bag and walked to the table. The sound of her boots on the hardwood floor was rhythmic and loud. "Actually," she said, her voice dropping its casual facade and shifting into a tone of absolute command, "I have a bit more than a pen." She placed the bag on the table and unzipped it. Linda frowned. "Excuse me? This is a private conversation." "It was private," Nora said, pulling out a thick stack of files, "until you committed felony wire fraud across state lines." The room went dead silent. The hum of the projector fan seemed to scream. Linda stood up. "Who are you? Get out of my house." "Sit down, Mrs. Caro," Nora said. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. The authority in her voice was absolute. "I am Nora Harrington. I am a senior litigation attorney specializing in financial fraud and elder abuse, and I am currently representing your stepdaughter, Rowan Mercer, in a forensic audit of her assets." Greg choked on his drink. He coughed violently, slamming the glass down. Nora ignored him. She began to lay documents out on the table, dealing them like tarot cards. "Item 1, she said, sliding a paper toward Greg. "A copy of the trust fund disbursement request, dated 18 months ago, signed by Gregory Mercer as proxy." "Item 2, she continued, sliding a photo toward Linda, "a photograph of this room, submitted as evidence of educational expenses for Rowan Mercer." "Item 3, the Articles of Organization for Caro Mercer Learning Hub, LLC, listing Rowan Mercer as a 50% owner without her consent." "Item 4, $90,000 in Small Business Administration loans, secured using Rowan Mercer's Social Security number." Nora stopped. She looked at Linda, whose face had drained of all color. Linda tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled sound. "This is ridiculous. These are internal family documents. We have an understanding. Rowan knows about all of this." "Do I?" I asked. I looked at my father. "Dad, did I know about the $90,000? Greg looked at the table. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was shaking. Linda slammed her hand on the table. "You are twisting things. We did this for the family. Rowan, tell her to leave. This is a misunderstanding." Nora reached into her file and pulled out a laptop. She opened it and pressed a key. Audio filled the room. It was crystal clear. "I gamed the system. Rowan, if you tell them it is for educational infrastructure and create a valid entity like the hub, they cut the check." Linda's voice, unmistakable, arrogant, proud. Linda froze. She looked at the laptop, then at me. Her eyes were wide with shock, and then, slowly, with pure hatred. "You recorded me?" she whispered. "In my own house?" Nora pressed another key. "I signed it for you. It is a family proxy. It is standard." Greg's voice. Greg put his head in his hands. "Oh God," he moaned. "Oh God. Linda." Eli let out a small sob from the corner. I stood up immediately. The sound of his distress cut through my anger. I walked over to him. "Eli," I said gently, "come with me." "I hate this," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Are Mom and Dad going to jail?" I didn't lie to him. I didn't say no. "I need you to go to the living room." I said, "Pack your backpack. Just your school stuff and your switch. Go next door to Mrs. Higgins. I already called her. She's making cookies. Just go." Linda started to move toward him. "Eli, stay right there." "Don't," I said. I turned to face her. And for the first time in 5 years, she stopped. She saw something in my face that terrified her. Do not speak to him." Eli ran. He grabbed his bag and bolted out the door. I heard the front door slam, and I felt a weight lift off my chest. He was safe. He wasn't in the room where the bombs were going off anymore. I turned back to the table. "Now," I said, sitting down, "let us talk about transparency." Linda was breathing hard. Her hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. "You ungrateful wretch," she hissed. "After everything I did, I cooked for you, I cleaned for you. You stole $225,000 from me," I said. "That is an estimate," she screamed. "It is valuation. The business has value." "The business is a shell company based on fraud," Nora corrected calmly, "and the state financial inspector agrees." Linda stopped screaming. "The inspector?" Nora nodded. She pulled a final, thick envelope from her bag. She placed it in the center of the table. "We have filed a protective disclosure with the state," Nora said. "We have handed over the timeline, the bank records, and the audio confessions. The authorities are currently reviewing the case for criminal charges: identity theft, wire fraud, larceny." Greg began to weep. It was a pathetic, broken sound. "I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am sorry. Rowan. She told me it was legal. She said everyone does it." "Shut up." "Greg," Linda snapped. She looked at Nora. "You are bluffing. You wouldn't send her father to prison. She doesn't have the guts." Nora looked at me. I looked at Linda. I thought about the slap. I thought about the years of being told I was a parasite. I thought about my mother's handwriting on that note, begging for my protection. "Try me," I said. Nora tapped the envelope on the table. "Inside this envelope is a civil settlement agreement," Nora said. "It outlines a full repayment plan. It mandates the immediate liquidation of the hub's assets. It requires the transfer of the deed to this house into a trust controlled by Rowan to secure the debt. And it requires a full, notarized confession of guilt." Linda stared at the envelope. Her confidence was cracking. The facade of the wealthy suburban matriarch crumbling to reveal the desperate grifter underneath. "And if we don't sign?" she whispered. Nora leaned forward. "Then I pick up my phone. I call the district attorney, and I hand them the recording of you bragging about gaming the system, and by tomorrow morning, this room will be a crime scene." Linda looked at the envelope. She looked at the whiteboard where I had written transparency needed. Her palms were sweating. I could see the damp marks on the polished wood of the table. She realized then that this wasn't a family squabble. This wasn't a tantrum she could manage with guilt trips and Bible verses. This was the end. I watched a bead of sweat roll down her temple. The clock on the wall ticked, loud, relentless. Tick, tick, tick. "Well?" I asked. Linda reached for the envelope, her hand shaking violently. 48 hours before I sat at the dining table watching Linda sweat. I had stood in line at the post office on Main Street. The air had smelled of cardboard and adhesive. I had 3 parcels in my arms, and they felt heavier than their physical weight because they contained the wreckage of my family. I had not just gathered evidence, I had weaponized it. The first parcel, the largest one, was addressed to the office of the state financial inspector in Denver. It contained everything: the forensic audit Mason had compiled, the timeline I had written, the high-resolution scans of the invoices, the audio files of Linda bragging about her crimes. I had paid for overnight delivery with signature confirmation. The second parcel was thinner. It was addressed to Hart and Lowell in Oregon. Inside was a formal legal demand, drafted by Nora, requiring them to state on the record that the Eleanor Vance Trust was never intended to be a slush fund for a homeschooling LLC. We needed them to strip away the educational discretion defense Linda was clinging to. Then there was the third envelope. It was just a standard letter, addressed to a blind box number at the state buildings, to be forwarded to the anonymous whistleblower who had started this whole avalanche. To the person who saw the truth, I had written, "You were the first one to light a match in the dark. I am now pouring the gasoline. Thank you." I did not know who they were. A disgruntled parent? A former teacher Linda had stiffed? It did not matter. They were the ghost in the machine. the silent partner in my revenge. I had handed the packages to the clerk, watched him slap the tracking stickers on them, and felt a strange sense of vertigo. Once these left my hands, there was no turning back. I was inviting the government into our living room. I was turning my father into a suspect. I had paid the postage, $62, and walked out into the sunlight, knowing that by the time the family meeting started on Sunday, the state of Colorado would already have a file with my last name on it. Back in the homeschool room, the silence was deafening. Linda was staring at the settlement agreement Nora had placed on the table. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a narrative she could spin. "You cannot prove intent," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "This is a civil dispute. You are trying to scare us." Nora looked at her watch. "Actually, Mrs. Caro," Nora said, her tone conversational but deadly. "That is the interesting part. You see, the package I put on this table is just a courtesy copy. The original was delivered to the State Financial Inspector's office yesterday morning at 9 o'clock. Linda dropped the envelope. It hit the table with a dull thud. You sent it to the state?" she whispered. "We did," Nora said. "We filed a formal report of identity theft and loan fraud. The inspector has already opened a case file. Case number 4922 Alpha." Linda turned pale, her makeup standing out like a mask against her skin. Nora leaned forward, clasping her hands. "However, because I have a professional relationship with the lead investigator, and because Rowan expressed a desire to minimize the trauma to her younger brother, we came to a temporary arrangement. The inspector has paused the referral to the district attorney's criminal division for exactly 24 hours. Nora pointed a finger at the settlement agreement. "They are waiting to see if you sign that. If you cooperate, if you agree to full restitution and asset liquidation, we can frame this as a civil resolution with a self-reporting correction. You lose the money, you lose the business, you lose the house, but you stay out of prison." "And if we don't?" Greg asked. His voice was a croak. "If you don't," Nora said, looking at him with pity, "then at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The pause lifts. The police will be here with a warrant for your arrest before you finish your coffee." The reality of it hit the room like a physical shockwave. This wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. Linda sat back, looking stunned. She had thought this was a game. She had thought she was playing chess against a daughter she could bully. She hadn't realized she was playing against the penal code of the state of Colorado. Then, Greg broke. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was an explosion. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the water glasses jump. "I told you!" he screamed, turning on Linda. "I told you this would happen!" "Greg," Linda snapped. "Shut up." "No!" Greg shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "I am not shutting up. You said it was fine. You said it was free money." He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet with panic. "Rowan, you have to believe me. I didn't want to sign those loan papers. She brought them to the garage every day for a week. She said the government was giving away money to everyone because of the pandemic. She said if we didn't take it, we were stupid." He pointed a shaking finger at his wife. She said, "No one checks. Greg, it is just government paper. Everyone does it. She told me it was a grant. She never said we were stealing your identity." "You signed them!" Linda shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "You are a grown man. Greg, do not try to pin this on me because you are too weak to provide for your family." "I was the provider," Greg yelled back, standing up and knocking his chair over, "until you bled me dry, until you needed the country club membership and the new car and the renovations. You spent it all." "Stop it," Linda screamed. I sat perfectly still. I watched them tear each other apart. It was ugly, and it was pathetic. These were the two people who had lectured me on family values for 5 years. These were the people who had called me selfish for wanting to keep my own paycheck. And the moment the pressure was applied, they turned into rats in a bucket, climbing over each other to escape the rising water. Nora cleared her throat. The sound cut through their screaming match instantly. "There is one more thing," she said. She turned her laptop around so the screen faced them. Mr. Mercer claims he was misled. Mrs. Caro claims it was a misunderstanding, but the bank tells a different story. Nora clicked a file. We subpoenaed the internal compliance logs from the bank that issued the largest SBA loan. She said, "It turns out their fraud algorithm actually flagged the application. The system noticed that the Social Security number belonged to a Rowan Mercer, but the IP address of the applicant was different from her usual login locations. They put a hold on the funds." Linda went very still. "They called the number on the application to verify the identity of the co-owner." Nora continued, "And someone answered. Someone who claimed to be Rowan Mercer's authorized representative." Nora pressed play. The recording was grainy, but the voices were distinct. "Bank officer, I just need to speak with Ms. Mercer briefly to confirm she authorizes this draw of $40,000. Female voice. "Oh, I am so sorry. But Rowan is actually in a secure server room right now. She works in data security. You know how it is. No phones allowed. But I am her power of attorney. She is fully aware. She is actually the one pushing me to get this done today so we can pay the contractors." Bank officer. "I see. And you have her full authorization?" Female voice. 100%. She is my daughter. We do everything together. I am just trying to help her manage the admin work while she saves the world, you know? Bank officer. Laughs. "All right, Mrs. Caro, I will push the approval through." The recording ended. The room was silent. "That was your voice, Linda," I said. I looked at her. "You impersonated a legal proxy. You lied to a federal loan officer. You used my job, the job you mock, the job you say makes me a parasite, as the excuse for why I couldn't speak for myself." Linda stared at the laptop. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked smaller. The confident, upper-crust mother was gone. In her place was a criminal who had been caught on tape. Greg looked at her with pure horror. "You told them you were her power of attorney? You don't have power of attorney." "She told me she did," Linda cried, desperate. "She told me I could handle things." "I never told you that," I said coldly. Just then, Nora's phone buzzed on the table. It was a sharp, vibrating sound against the wood. Nora picked it up. She read the screen, her face impassive. Then, the corner of her mouth quirked up in a humorless smile. "Well," she said, "that is timely." She looked at us. "That was an automated update from the inspector's office. The case status has just been upgraded from pending review to priority investigation. They have assigned a senior auditor." She looked at Linda and Greg. "That means they have looked at the preliminary evidence package we sent, and they did not like what they saw. The clock is ticking faster than I thought." Nora turned to me. "Rowan," she said. Her voice was formal, stripping away the friendship, leaving only the attorney and the client. "We have a binary choice. The settlement offer is on the table. It strips them of the assets they stole and ensures you are repaid over time. It keeps them out of prison, primarily for the sake of your brother." She paused, making sure they were listening to every word. "But if they do not sign, if they hesitate, if they try to negotiate, do you want to proceed with the criminal track? Do you want me to call the inspector back right now and tell them to unpause the warrants?" I looked at the envelope in the center of the table. I thought about the money, $225,000. I thought about the trust fund, my grandmother's legacy, meant to give me a head start, turned into a slush fund for Linda's ego. I thought about my mother, protect my daughter. I looked at Greg, my father, the man who had sold me out for a quiet life. I looked at Linda, the woman who had slapped me and called me ungrateful while wearing clothes bought with my stolen future. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the dutiful daughter to surface, the one who would apologize for causing a scene, the one who would take the blame to save the family image. But that daughter was dead. She had died in this room, 5 days ago. When a hand struck her face and a doorbell rang, I looked Nora in the eye. "If they do not sign," I said clearly, "put them in jail." Linda gasped. Greg slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. I looked at them both. "I am done paying for your mistakes." I said, "Sign the papers, or wait for the police. It makes no difference to me." The silence that followed was heavy, final, and absolute. The air in the room felt thin, as if all the oxygen had been consumed by the truth. The conference room at Nora Harrington's firm was a glass box suspended 12 stories above the city. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive coffee, a stark contrast to the scent of pot roast and fear that had permeated my family's dining room the night before. This was neutral ground, or at least, that is what the law required us to call it. In reality, it was a shark tank, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the bleeding bait. I sat at the head of the mahogany table. Nora was to my right. In the center of the table sat a high-definition speakerphone, its green light pulsing steadily. That was Inspector Davis from the State Financial Inspector's office, dialing in to oversee what he termed pre-indictment negotiations. Across from us sat Greg and Linda. They looked like ghosts of the people they had been 48 hours ago. Greg was wearing a suit that hung loosely on his frame, his tie crooked. Linda was dressed in black, her face devoid of makeup, her hands clutching a tissue that was already shredded to pieces. Next to them was a man named Mr. Henderson, a strip mall defense attorney they had hired this morning. He looked tired. He had the frantic energy of a man who had been handed a bomb 5 seconds before detonation and was still reading the manual on how to defuse it. "So," Nora began, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "let us review the offer on the table." She slid a thick document toward Mr. Henderson. "My client, Ms. Mercer, is willing to petition the state inspector to downgrade the charges from felony identity theft and grand larceny to a civil fraud settlement with administrative penalties. This recommendation is contingent on full cooperation." Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, scanning the document. "The terms?" he asked. Nora didn't blink. "First, full restitution of the Eleanor Vance Trust. That is $125,000. Plus interest calculated from the date of the first unauthorized withdrawal. Second, immediate repayment of the $90,000 in Small Business Administration loans taken out in Miss Mercer's name. Third, the immediate transfer of 100% ownership of Caro Mercer Learning Hub, LLC, to Ms. Mercer, so she may dissolve the entity and liquidate its assets." She paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. "And finally, your clients will sign a permanent affidavit admitting to the unauthorized use of Ms. Mercer's Social Security number and agreeing to a lifetime ban on acting as financial proxies for any family member." Mr. Henderson looked up, his face pale. This is essentially bankruptcy," he stammered. "If they liquidate the LLC and repay the trust, they will have to sell the house. They will have to cash out their retirement accounts." "That is correct," Nora said calmly. "That is usually what happens when you spend $250,000 that does not belong to you." Mr. Henderson looked at his clients. Greg was staring at the table. Linda was staring at me, her eyes burning with a mixture of fear and fury. "My clients are willing to discuss restitution," Mr. Henderson tried, attempting to find some footing. "But the transfer of the business? The dissolution? That seems punitive. The hub is a functioning educational entity. If we can set up a payment plan from the profits—" "There are no profits," Nora interrupted. "It is a Ponzi scheme built on stolen capital. Furthermore," Mr. Henderson continued, raising his voice slightly, "we believe there is a strong argument for misunderstanding here. Mrs. Caro is not a lawyer. She believed she was acting within the scope of her role as the matriarch of the household. The paperwork for the LLC was complex. She thought the family proxy status she held for medical decisions extended to financial ones. It was an error of ignorance, not malice." I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, hot and bitter. Ignorance. Nora didn't laugh. She simply reached for her laptop. "Ignorance, you say?" she asked. She clicked a file. The room filled with Linda's voice, recorded in her own kitchen. "I gamed the system. Rowan, if you tell them it is for educational infrastructure and create a valid entity like the hub, they cut the check." Mr. Henderson flinched. Nora clicked another file. Bank officer. And you have her full authorization? Linda. 100%. She is my daughter. I am her power of attorney. Nora closed the laptop. That does not sound like ignorance. Mr. Henderson, she said. That sounds like premeditated federal wire fraud. That sounds like your client explicitly stating she knew how to manipulate the system to bypass legal safeguards. The speakerphone in the center of the table crackled. Inspector Davis's voice filled the room, tinny but authoritative. Counselor, the inspector said, addressing Mr. Henderson, I have been working fraud cases for 20 years. I have seen strangers steal identities. I have seen cartels do it. But I have rarely seen a parent systematically identity theft their own child to this extent. We have evidence that Mrs. Caro used Miss Mercer's credentials to apply for loans while Miss Mercer was physically located in a different county. This is not a misunderstanding. This is predation. The word predation hung in the air. Greg made a sound like a wounded animal. He slumped forward, his forehead hitting the polished wood of the table. Please, he sobbed. Please stop. He looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, the bags under them dark purple. Rowan, he whispered, we will pay it back. I swear. I will sell the truck. I will sell the tools. Just do not let them take Linda. She didn't mean to hurt you. She just wanted us to be secure. She thought if the business took off, we could all be rich. It was for the family. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taught me to tie my shoes, the man who used to take me for ice cream on Sundays. And all I saw was a coward who had let his wife cannibalize his daughter because he was too afraid to be alone. She committed a crime. Dad, I said, my voice was steady, startlingly so. She stole my name. She stole my credit. She stole Grandma's money. She is your mother, Greg pleaded, tears streaming down his face into his collar. In every way that matters. She took care of us when your mom died. Do not put her in prison. Rowan, please, I am begging you, punish me. I signed the papers too, but leave her out of it. It was pathetic, it was heartbreaking, and it was utterly useless. Linda, however, was not crying. She sat up straighter. She smoothed the front of her black blouse. She looked at Greg with disgust, then turned her gaze to me. Stop begging, Greg, she snapped. It is embarrassing. She looked me in the eye. You are enjoying this, aren't you? She asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it vibrated with venom. You think you are so special, Linda spat. You think that money makes you better than us, but without me, you would be nothing. When your mother died, this family was a ruin. Your father was a drunk. You were a mess. I came in and I fixed it. I built a home. I built a life. She gestured around the room, as if the expensive law office was somehow her creation. I used that money to keep us afloat, to give you a standard of living you take for granted. The organic food, the clean house, the stable environment for your brother. Who do you think paid for the labor? Me, my time, my effort. And now you want to send me to jail because I paid myself a salary for saving your life? She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You are an ungrateful, selfish child. Rowan, you have always been jealous that your father chose me. You have always wanted to punish us for being happy. Well, congratulations. You won. You destroyed the family. I hope the money keeps you warm at night. Mr. Henderson put his head in his hands. Mrs. Caro, please stop talking, he whispered. But she didn't stop. She stared at me, defiant, righteous in her delusion. She truly believed it. She believed that stealing $250,000 was her payment for being a stepmother. Nora turned to me. She didn't look at Linda. She didn't look at Greg. She looked only at me. Rowan, she said softly. The room went quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. This is the moment, Nora said. You have the power here. We can accept a partial plea. We can negotiate a payment plan that leaves them the house. We can ask the inspector to be lenient. She paused. Or we can enforce the full terms. We can take everything they stole and everything they bought with what they stole. But you have to decide, is this a negotiation or is this an execution? I looked at Nora. Then I looked at the window, at the city skyline stretching out under the gray sky. I thought about the last 5 years. I thought about the nights I stayed up until 2 in the morning working extra shifts because Linda said the electric bill was high. I thought about the guilt trips every time I bought myself a coffee. I thought about Eli, huddling in the corner while they screamed about money. And then I thought about the slap. I turned to Linda. "You said I was enjoying this," I said. My voice was quiet. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. "You slapped me across the face 4 days ago because I wouldn't let you buy a facial with my money. You called me a parasite while you were wearing clothes I paid for, standing in a house I was subsidizing." Linda opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "You stole the money my mother left me to protect me from exactly this situation. You took her final act of love and turned it into a remodel for your ego. You didn't save this family. Linda, you ate it. You hollowed it out from the inside until there was nothing left but debt and lies." I looked at Greg. "And you, Dad, you watched her do it. You signed the papers. You drank your whiskey in the garage and pretended you didn't know your wife was robbing your daughter." I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt crisp, clean. "This isn't an exercise in morality," I said, echoing Nora's earlier words. "This is an audit, and the balance sheet is due." I turned to Nora. "I want the full package," I said. "Mr. Henderson gasped. "Everything." I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I want the trust repaid in full. I want the loans paid off today, even if they have to sell the house to a flipper by noon. I want the business dissolved. I want the confession signed." I looked directly at Linda. "No negotiation, no payment plans, no mercy." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "If they do not sign that paper in the next 5 minutes, Nora, tell Inspector Davis to execute the warrants. I will testify. I will hand over every receipt. I will watch them get handcuffed and walked out of this building." I sat back. "It is your choice," I said to them. "You can walk out of here with nothing but your freedom, or you can walk out of here in cuffs. Decide." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of its arc, waiting for gravity to do its work. Inspector Davis's breathing was audible over the speakerphone. Mr. Henderson looked at his clients, his face grim. Greg was sobbing silently. And Linda? Linda looked at me, and for the first time, the defiance broke. Her eyes darted to the door, then to the document, then back to me. She realized, finally, that the parasite had grown teeth. She realized she was the prey. Mr. Henderson, the strip mall lawyer with the frayed collar, stood up. He looked at the document in front of him, then at the recording device, and finally at the open laptop where Nora sat like an executioner waiting to drop the blade. He asked for a recess. He took my father and stepmother into the hallway. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I watched them. It was like watching a silent film about the collapse of an empire. I saw Linda waving her hands, her face twisted in that familiar mask of self-righteous fury. I saw Greg slumped against the wall, sliding down inches at a time, looking less like a man and more like a pile of laundry. I saw Mr. Henderson speaking firmly, chopping the air with his hand, pointing back at the conference room where Inspector Davis was waiting on the speakerphone. They argued for 4 minutes. Then, the fight went out of them. Linda's shoulders dropped. Greg nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. They walked back in. The air in the room felt different. The defiance was gone, replaced by the sour, metallic smell of defeat. Mr. Henderson sat down. He did not look at me. "They will sign," he said quietly. Nora did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply uncapped a heavy fountain pen and slid the document across the mahogany table. "All copies," she said. "Initial every page, full signature on the last page, and the confession affidavit needs to be notarized by my paralegal." who is waiting outside. Greg was the first to move. He reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so badly that the first attempt to grasp it failed, and the pen clattered against the wood. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He picked it up again. He looked at the papers. These were the documents that would strip him of everything. The house in Maple Ridge, the new SUV, the retirement account he had drained and refilled with my money, the sham business. "I am sorry," he whispered. The words were directed at the paper, not at me. He signed, scratch, 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 with every signature. He was signing away the life he had built on my back. He was evicting himself from the fortress of lies he had constructed. When he finished, he pushed the stack toward Linda and put his head on the table, weeping silently. Linda stared at the pen. She did not reach for it immediately. She looked at me. Her eyes were dry, hard, and hateful. She wanted me to flinch. She wanted me to look away. I did not blink. She snatched the pen. She signed her name with aggressive, jagged strokes, tearing the paper slightly on the final page. "You are happy now," she spat, not looking up. "You are destroying us. You are killing this family." Nora reached out and pulled the signed documents away from Linda, verifying the signatures with a professional glance. "This family destroyed itself a long time ago." "Mrs. Caro," Nora said, her voice cool and detached. "Today is just the day we filed the paperwork." Linda opened her mouth to scream, to launch one final tirade about her sacrifices, but the speakerphone cut her off. "This is Inspector Davis," the voice said. "I have received confirmation from counsel that the documents are executed. I am formally logging the civil settlement agreement." The green light on the phone pulsed. "However," the inspector continued, his voice hardening, "let me be clear. The case file number 4922 Alpha remains open. It is suspended, not closed. If I see one suspicious transaction, one credit inquiry, or one attempt to contact the victim, the suspension lifts. The warrants are already drafted. Do not give me a reason to print them." The line went dead. The silence that followed was absolute. It was over. I sat there, looking at the stack of papers. I expected to feel triumphant. I expected to feel a surge of adrenaline. Instead, I felt a strange physical sensation, as if a series of heavy, wet ropes that had been wrapped around my chest for 5 years were suddenly being cut away, one by one. Snip, the mortgage payments I didn't owe. Snip, the guilt trips about being selfish. Snip, the fear of Linda's rage. Snip, the weight of my father's weakness. It wasn't violent. It was just a release. I took a breath, and for the first time in a decade, the air reached the bottom of my lungs. "Mr. Henderson packed his briefcase. He looked exhausted. "Come on," he said to them. "We need to go over the liquidation timeline. You have 30 days to vacate the property before it goes on the market." Greg stood up. He looked old. He looked like a stranger. He shuffled toward the door, then stopped. He turned to me. He hesitated, licking his lips. His eyes darted to Nora, then back to me. "Rowan," he said. His voice was a wheedle, a pathetic attempt at intimacy. "Since we have to move, and the accounts are frozen, the deposit for a rental apartment is pretty steep. I was wondering if maybe you could help us with just the first month? Just to get settled? I will pay you back once the house sells." I stared at him. I stared at the man who had just signed a confession admitting to stealing nearly $250,000 from me. The ink wasn't even dry, and he was already asking for a loan. He hadn't learned a thing. He didn't see me as a person who had been wronged. He saw me as a vending machine that had temporarily jammed. It was almost funny. It was the absurdity of absolute narcissism. I stood up, I smoothed my skirt, I picked up my purse. "That is not my business anymore." "Dad," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't put any emotion into it at all. It was just a fact, like stating that the sky was blue or that water was wet. His problems were no longer my problems. Greg flinched as if I had hit him. He opened his mouth to beg, but Linda grabbed his arm. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. Leave her, Linda hissed. She looked at me with a look that promised eternal victimhood. You will regret this. Rowan, she said. You think you are free? You are going to be all alone. You have no parents now, no family. When you fail, and you will fail, there will be no one there to catch you. You will die alone in that city. She waited for the fear to hit me. She waited for the old programming to kick in, the part of me that was terrified of abandonment. But the programming was gone. It had been overwritten by the truth. Nora stepped forward, placing herself physically between me and Linda. You are wrong, Mrs. Caro, Nora said, a small, sharp smile playing on her lips. She isn't alone. From this moment forward, the law stands beside her, and unlike you, the law doesn't drain her bank account or slap her in the face. Nora opened the door. Get out. Linda glared at us one last time, then turned and dragged Greg out of the room. I watched them walk down the hallway toward the elevators. They looked small. They looked ordinary. They were just two people who had made a series of terrible choices, and now they had to live with them. I turned to Nora. Thank you, I said. Nora nodded. She didn't hug me. We weren't huggers. She just squeezed my forearm. You did good. Rowan, she said, go live your life. I walked out of the office building and onto the sidewalk. It was late afternoon. The sun was dipping behind the skyscrapers, casting long golden shadows across the pavement. The city noise washed over me. The honking of taxis, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant rumble of the subway. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. It was a secure message from Hart and Lowell. Ms. Mercer, per the settlement agreement, we have received confirmation of the judgment. The Eleanor Vance Trust has been reinstated under your sole control. The new account number has been generated. The funds are yours. I stared at the screen. The money was back. But it wasn't just money. It was agency. It was the ability to say no. It was the ability to walk away. I looked at my hands. They were empty. For 5 years. They had been full of other people's burdens. They had carried grocery bags for meals I wasn't thanked for. They had typed emails to pay bills that weren't mine. They had trembled while holding a bice pack to my face after my stepmother hit me. Now they were just hands, my hands. A yellow school bus rumbled past on the street, full of children laughing and shouting. I thought of the homeschool room. I thought of the poster that said, "Family is an anchor." They were right. Family was an anchor, but sometimes an anchor is just a heavy weight designed to keep you from sailing, and sometimes you have to cut the chain to survive. I turned my back on the direction of the suburbs. I turned my back on Maple Ridge. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and started walking. I wasn't walking toward an apartment or a job. I was walking toward the bank on the corner. I was going to open a checking account that had only one name on it. Rowan Elise Mercer. I took a deep breath of the city air. It smelled of exhaust and coffee and infinite possibility. I was 29 years old. I had scars on my credit report and a bruise fading on my cheek. But as I merged into the crowd, disappearing into the beautiful anonymity of the city, I realized something that made me smile. I was finally free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Rowan's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and reclaiming freedom, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to us.